The wagon train's dust cloud was already disappearing over the eastern ridge when Eleanor Dalton realized they had left her behind, her twisted ankle throbbing with each shallow breath she took as she sat on the hard, packed earth of the California Trail. She had been gathering water from a creek bed when she slipped on the mossy stones, the crack of her ankle echoing in her ears louder than any gunshot. By the time she had crawled back to where the wagons should have been, there was nothing but wheel ruts in the dirt and the fading sound of oxen bellowing in the distance. It was June of 1867, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the rolling hills between the Sierra Nevada foothills and the coastal valleys. The wagon master, a hard man named Pritchard, had warned everyone that morning that they could not afford any more delays. They were 3 weeks behind schedule, and supplies were running dangerously low. Eleanor understood the logic, even as the cruelty of it settled into her bones like winter frost. She heard the horse before she saw it, the rhythmic clip of hooves on stone growing louder behind her. Eleanor turned, shielding her eyes from the sun, and saw a lone rider approaching at an easy canter. The man sat tall in his saddle, his dark hat pulled low over his face, and for a moment she felt a spike of fear. But as he drew closer, she recognized him from the wagon train. His name was Daniel Ellis, a cowboy who had been hired on as a scout and hunter somewhere back in Nevada. He was young, probably no more than 25, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of winter sky. Eleanor had spoken to him only once or twice during the journey, brief exchanges about the weather or the condition of the trail. Daniel pulled his horse to a stop beside her and dismounted in one smooth motion. His eyes went immediately to her ankle, which had swollen to twice its normal size and was already turning an ugly purple-black color. "They just left you," he said, and it was not a question. "My ankle," Eleanor said, her voice catching despite her efforts to remain composed. "I fell." By the time I got back, they were already moving. I tried to call out, but I do not think anyone heard me. Daniel crouched beside her, his hands gentle as he examined her injury without touching it. "That is broken for sure. You cannot walk on that." "I know." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. She was 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Ohio who had been traveling to San Francisco to take a position at a girls' academy. Everything she owned was in the wagon she had been sharing with the Hendricks family, and now it was all gone. "You should go catch up with them. There is no sense in both of us being stranded out here." Daniel stood and looked toward the horizon where the wagon train had disappeared. When he turned back to her, his expression was calm, almost serene. "I never liked Pritchard much anyway. Man has a mean streak wider than the Mississippi." "What are you saying?" "I am saying I am not leaving you out here to die." He moved to his horse and began unpacking his saddlebags. "San Pedro is about 40 miles south of here. It is a decent-sized town on the coast. We can make it there in a few days if we take it slow." Eleanor stared at him, trying to understand why this near stranger would throw away his prospects to help her. "You do not even know me." "Why would you do this?" Daniel paused in his unpacking and met her eyes. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because I have seen what happens to people left alone in country like this." He pulled out a length of cloth and a flat piece of wood. "Now hold still. This is going to hurt, but I need to splint that ankle before we can move you." The pain when he set the brake was white-hot and all-consuming, and Eleanor had to bite down on her own hand to keep from screaming. Daniel worked quickly and efficiently, his movements sure and practiced. When he finished, he sat back and wiped the sweat from his brow. "You have done this before," Eleanor said through gritted teeth. "Grew up on a ranch in Texas, seen my share of broken bones, both human and animal." He stood and offered her his hand. "Can you stand if I help you?" With his support, Eleanor managed to get to her feet, keeping all her weight on her good leg. Daniel was taller than she had realized and solid as an oak tree. He smelled of leather and sage and wood smoke. "I am going to lift you onto my horse," he said. "Then I will walk alongside until we find a good place to make camp for the night." "You cannot walk 40 miles, Eleanor protested. "I can walk as far as I need to." His tone was firm but not unkind. "Now put your arms around my neck." He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, settling her gently into his saddle. The horse, a sturdy bay gelding, shifted slightly but remained calm. Daniel gathered the reins and began leading them south, following a barely visible trail through the golden grass. They traveled in silence for the first hour. Eleanor clung to the saddle horn, trying to ignore the throbbing in her ankle and the growing awareness of how completely her life had changed in the span of a single morning. Everything she had planned, every hope she had carried across 2,000 miles of wilderness, now seemed impossibly distant. And yet, looking down at the broad shoulders of the man leading her to safety, she felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Not gratitude, though there was that. Something deeper and more complicated. "Why were you riding back there?" she finally asked. "Everyone else was with the main group." "Thought I saw smoke on the northern ridge," Daniel replied without turning around. "Wanted to make sure it was not trouble." Turns out it was just some prospectors with a morning cook fire. He adjusted his hat against the sun. "When I got back to where the train had been at dawn, I saw your tracks leading down to the creek, found your water bucket lying on its side. You came looking for me." Seemed like someone should. The simplicity of his answer made Eleanor's throat tighten. She had been part of that wagon train for 3 months, had cooked meals and mended clothes and taught the children their letters. And when she needed help, they had rolled on without a backward glance. But this cowboy, this virtual stranger, had turned his back on his own journey to make sure she survived. "I do not know how I will ever repay you," she said softly. Daniel did glance back at her then, and she saw a hint of a smile on his weathered face. "Did not do it for payment, Miss Dalton. Did it because you deserve better than being left to the coyotes." They made camp that evening in a small grove of oak trees near a spring. Daniel helped Eleanor down from the horse and settled her on his bedroll, propped against a fallen log. He moved about the camp with practiced efficiency, gathering firewood, filling their canteen, hobbling his horse to graze. Eleanor watched him work, feeling utterly useless and hating it. "There must be something I can do," she said as he built up the fire. "You can rest and let that ankle start healing." He pulled out a battered coffee pot and a small sack of beans. "We have a hard few days ahead of us." "Tell me about San Pedro," Eleanor said, partly to distract herself from her pain and partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "Have you been there before?" "Once, about 2 years back." Daniel measured coffee grounds into the pot with care. "It is a harbor town, lots of ships coming in and out, has a few hotels, some saloons, a church. There is a doctor there named Chen who came over from China. Best bone setter I ever met." "A Chinese doctor," Eleanor repeated thoughtfully. "That must be unusual. Doc Chen is unusual in a lot of ways, but he is good at what he does. He will take proper care of your ankle." Daniel set the coffee pot on the fire and sat back on his heels. "Town has some good people in it. You will be safe there while you figure out what comes next." The weight of that statement settled over Eleanor like a heavy blanket. What did come next? She had no money beyond the few coins in her pocket, no possessions, no prospects. The position in San Francisco would surely be filled by now if she did not arrive. She was utterly adrift in a way she had never been before in her carefully planned life. "I can see you thinking too hard," Daniel said gently. One problem at a time, Miss Dalton. First we get to San Pedro. Then we get your ankle treated. Everything else can wait. Please call me Eleanor, she said. I think you have earned the right to use my Christian name given the circumstances. All right then, Eleanor, and you can call me Daniel. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. Tell me something about yourself. Where are you from? What made you decide to travel all the way to California? So Eleanor told him. She talked about growing up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolmaster and a seamstress. She spoke of her love for learning, how she had devoured every book she could get her hands on. She described the thrill she had felt when the letter arrived from the San Francisco Academy, offering her a teaching position at a salary that seemed like a fortune. And she talked about the journey west, the excitement and fear and wonder of crossing a continent. Daniel listened without interrupting, his eyes reflecting the firelight. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. My story is not nearly so interesting, he finally said. Born on a ranch outside San Antonio. Learned to ride before I could walk, according to my mother. Father died when I was 12, thrown from a horse. Mother passed 2 years later from fever. I have been working cattle drives and ranches ever since, moving around wherever the work takes me. No family left, a sister in Austin, married to a blacksmith. We write sometimes, but I have not seen her in 5 years. He stared into the fire. This life does not leave much room for roots. You like it? The moving around, Daniel considered the question. I used to think I did. Like seeing new country, meeting new people. But lately I have been thinking it might be nice to have a place that is mine, a piece of land I could build something on. What stopped you? Money, mostly. Good land is not cheap, and cowboy wages do not stretch far. He smiled, but there was a touch of sadness in it. And I suppose I never had a good enough reason to stop moving, nothing tying me down. They fell into a comfortable silence, drinking their coffee and watching the stars emerge overhead. Eleanor found herself studying Daniel's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe despite their precarious situation. You should try to sleep, Daniel said eventually. I will keep watch for a while. Watch for what? Mountain lions, mostly. Sometimes bandits use these trails. Do not worry, though. I am a light sleeper. He saw the alarm on her face and added quickly, I do not expect trouble, just being cautious. Eleanor lay back on the bedroll, her ankle elevated on a folded blanket. The ground was harder than any bed she had ever slept on, and every sound in the darkness made her tense. But gradually, exhaustion overtook her fear and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. She woke several times during the night. Each time, she saw Daniel silhouetted against the fire, watchful and alert. Once, she heard him singing softly to himself, an old Spanish song that floated through the darkness like a prayer. The sound of his voice soothed her back to sleep. Morning came with a spectacular sunrise that painted the coastal hills in shades of gold and rose. Daniel had coffee brewing and was frying strips of dried beef in a small pan. Eleanor struggled to sit up, wincing at the stiffness in her back and the renewed throbbing in her ankle. How does it feel? Daniel asked, bringing her a plate of food. Like someone drove a spike through it, Eleanor admitted. But I will manage. We will take it slower today. I saw some smoke to the southwest yesterday evening. Might be a homestead. If we are lucky, we can trade for some food supplies and maybe get you a place to rest indoors tonight. They set out after breakfast, Daniel walking beside the horse as he had the day before. The trail wound through golden hills dotted with oak trees and occasional stands of pine. In the distance, Eleanor could see the dark line of mountains to the east, and when they crested a particularly high ridge, the glittering expanse of the Pacific Ocean to the west. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "California has its charms," Daniel agreed. "Land of opportunity, they say. Though I have found opportunity usually requires a fair bit of hard work and good luck." Around midday, they came upon the homestead Daniel had spotted. It was a modest adobe house with a barn and a small corral holding a few horses. A man emerged as they approached, rifle in hand but not pointed at them. He was middle-aged with sun-weathered skin and wary eyes. "Afternoon," Daniel called out, stopping a respectful distance away. "We are traveling to San Pedro. The lady had an accident and broke her ankle. We would be grateful for a chance to water our horse and fill our canteens. We can pay." The homesteader looked them over carefully, then lowered his rifle. "You folks look like you have had a rough go of it. Come on in. Name is James Porter. My wife Margaret will want to hear your story." Margaret Porter was a tiny woman with iron-gray hair and the kindest eyes Eleanor had ever seen. She took one look at Eleanor's splinted ankle and immediately began issuing orders. Within minutes, Eleanor found herself settled on a real bed in the porter's small guest room, her ankle re-splinted with proper bandages, a cup of hot soup in her hands. "Wagon train left you behind," Margaret said, shaking her head. "Shameful, that is what it is. No Christian charity in people anymore." "Daniel stayed to help me," Eleanor said. "I would be dead if not for him. That young man has a good heart, I can see that." Margaret smoothed the blanket over Eleanor's legs. "You two married?" "No," Eleanor felt her face heat. "No, we only know each other from the wagon train. He is just helping me get to San Pedro." Margaret's knowing smile suggested she did not quite believe the just helping part, but she did not press the issue. "Well, you are welcome to stay here tonight. Give that ankle another day of rest before you push on. James says it is about 25 miles from here to San Pedro, so you are over halfway there." "We could not impose," Eleanor began, but Margaret waved away her protests. "Nonsense. We do not get much company out here. It will be nice to have folks to talk to. And that young man of yours looks like he could use a proper meal and a night of real sleep." Daniel tried to protest as well when Margaret extended the invitation, but she was as immovable as a boulder. They ended up staying not just for dinner but for the night. James and Margaret had been homesteading in California for 15 years, having come west from Missouri. They had 3 grown children, all of whom had moved to bigger towns, and they clearly missed having young people around. Over dinner, a hearty meal of roasted chicken and vegetables from Margaret's garden, James told stories of the early days of settlement, of conflicts with Mexican landholders and the chaos after California became a state. Daniel listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. Eleanor found herself watching him more than listening to the stories, noticing the way he treated the Porters with genuine respect, how he insisted on helping James with the evening chores despite having walked 20 miles that day. After dinner, Margaret shooed the men outside and sat with Eleanor, helping her wash up and change into a borrowed nightgown. "He is in love with you, you know," Margaret said matter-of-factly. Eleanor's heart skipped. "We barely know each other. Some things do not require much time." Margaret brushed out Eleanor's long dark hair with gentle strokes. "The way he looks at you when you are not watching, the careful way he speaks about you, that is a man who has already given his heart away." "Even if that were true, I have nothing to offer him," Eleanor said quietly. "I have no money, no prospects, no family. I am completely dependent on his charity." "Is that what you think this is? Charity?" Margaret's laugh was soft. "Child, that man gave up his own plans to save your life. That is not charity. That is love, even if he has not put a name to it yet." She set down the brush and met Eleanor's eyes in the mirror. "The question is, how do you feel about him?" Eleanor opened her mouth to give some dismissive answer, but the words died in her throat. How did she feel about Daniel Ellis? Grateful, certainly. Safe in his presence, definitely. But there was more, was there not? The way her breath caught when he smiled at her. The comfort she felt hearing his voice in the darkness. The growing certainty that she did not want to imagine her future without him in it. "I think I might be falling in love with him too," she whispered. "But it is too soon, too fast, and completely impractical given our circumstances. Love is never practical, dear, and it does not follow any schedule." Margaret patted her shoulder. "My advice, do not fight it. Life is too short and too uncertain out here in the wild country. When you find someone good, you hold on tight." That night, lying in the comfortable bed with the sounds of the homestead settling around her, Eleanor thought about Margaret's words. She had always been so careful, so deliberate in her choices. Teaching was a practical profession for a woman. The journey west was a calculated risk for a good opportunity, but nothing about her current situation was practical or calculated. She was broken and penniless, dependent on a cowboy who had every reason to leave her and none to stay. And yet, he stayed. The next morning, Daniel helped Eleanor back onto his horse while James and Margaret packed them supplies for the final leg of their journey. Margaret hugged Eleanor tightly before they left. "You come back and visit us if you end up settling in these parts," she said. "I would like to hear how your story ends." "I will," Eleanor promised, surprised by how much she meant it. The Porters had shown her more kindness in one evening than the Wagon train had in 3 months. The landscape changed as they traveled south and west. The rolling hills gave way to more dramatic terrain, with rocky outcroppings and deep ravines. The scent of the ocean grew stronger, and gulls wheeled overhead. Daniel pointed out landmarks, telling her stories he had heard from other travelers. He had a knack for storytelling, Eleanor realized, a way of bringing the landscape to life. "There was a rancho here before California became a state," he said as they passed through what looked like the remains of an old settlement. "Belonged to a Mexican family named Domings. They had thousands of acres, ran cattle as far as you could see, but after the Americans took over they lost most of it in legal battles. Now it is all being divided up into homesteads." "That hardly seems fair," Eleanor said. "Fair and legal are not always the same thing." Daniel's tone was neutral, but she could hear the disapproval beneath it. "I have seen a lot of that kind of injustice out here. Americans taking land from Mexicans, everyone taking land from the Indians. It makes me think about whether this whole westward expansion is as noble as they make it sound in the newspapers back east. You have thought a lot about this. Hard not to when you spend as much time as I do talking to people from all different backgrounds. The world looks different depending on where you are standing." He glanced back at her. "What do they teach about all this in those schoolbooks you use?" "Mostly that it is our manifest destiny to settle from coast to coast," Eleanor said slowly, "that we are bringing civilization and progress. But I confess, I never thought much about what that meant for the people who were already here." "Most folks do not," Daniel said without judgment. "Easier not to ask questions." They fell into a contemplative silence after that, but it was not uncomfortable. Eleanor found herself thinking about the assumptions she had carried west with her, the unexamined beliefs about progress and civilization. Daniel's quiet observations had opened a door in her mind, and she could not close it again. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and San Pedro spread out before them. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, with a natural harbor protected by a curving peninsula. Ships bobbed at anchor, and she could see the outline of buildings clustered near the waterfront. The sight of civilization after days in the wilderness should have been comforting, but instead Eleanor felt a strange reluctance. Once they reached San Pedro, the journey would be over. Daniel would deliver her to the doctor, make sure she was settled, and then what? He would move on to wherever his wandering life took him next, and she would be alone again. San Pedro, Daniel said unnecessarily. We made it. Yes, Eleanor said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. Thanks to you. They made their way down into the town, as the sun began its descent toward the ocean. The streets were busy with sailors, merchants, and townspeople going about their business. Daniel seemed to know where he was going, leading them through the maze of buildings to a neat adobe house with a sign in both English and Chinese characters. A young Chinese man answered Daniel's knock. His face brightened in recognition. Mr. Ellis, I did not know you were back in San Pedro. Hello, Thomas. Is your father available? I have a patient who needs his help. Thomas Chen, who spoke English with barely a trace of an accent, ushered them inside and went to fetch his father. The house was comfortable and scrupulously clean, with an interesting mix of Western furniture and Chinese decorations. Eleanor had never been in a Chinese home before and found herself fascinated by the differences. Dr. Chen appeared a few minutes later. He was perhaps 50, with silver streaking his black hair and the calm, assessing eyes of a man who had seen everything. He examined Eleanor's ankle with gentle, expert hands, asking questions about how the injury had occurred and what treatment she had received. The splint was well done, he said to Daniel. You may have saved her from worse complications. As it is, the break is clean. With proper rest and care, it should heal well, though she will need to stay off it for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Eleanor repeated weakly. 6 weeks in a strange town with no money and no prospects. How was she supposed to manage that? Dr. Chen seemed to read her thoughts. Do not worry about payment right now. We will work something out. He turned to Daniel. Are you staying in San Pedro or will you be moving on? It was the question Eleanor had been dreading. She held her breath, waiting for Daniel's answer. I am staying, Daniel said without hesitation, at least for a while. The relief that flooded through Eleanor was so intense it left her shaky. Doctor. Chen smiled slightly, as if he too understood more than was being said. In that case, I have a suggestion, the doctor said. My wife and I have a spare room upstairs. Miss Dalton could stay there while she recovers. In exchange, perhaps she could help my wife with some tasks. Sarah is American, from Boston originally, and she has been talking about wanting to learn to read Chinese. If Miss Dalton is a teacher, perhaps they could trade lessons. Sarah teaches Eleanor about running a household out here. Eleanor teaches Sarah whatever she wishes to learn. I could not possibly, Eleanor began, but Dr. Chen held up a hand. It is a fair trade and it solves several problems at once. Please, at least meet my wife before you refuse. Sarah Chen appeared as if summoned, a tall, striking woman with red hair and green eyes. She looked to be in her 30s and had the kind of face that suggested both intelligence and humor. Her greeting was warm and genuine, and within minutes, she and Eleanor were deep in conversation about books and teaching methods. It was decided almost without Eleanor consciously agreeing to it. She would stay with the Chens during her recovery. And you, Mr. Ellis, Dr. Chen asked, do you have a place to stay? I will find a room somewhere, Daniel said. I saw a boarding house down near the harbor. That establishment is not suitable, Sarah said firmly. Mrs. Murphy drinks, and the place is filthy. There is a much better boarding house 2 streets over, run by a widow named Mrs. O'Reilly. Tell her Dr. Chen sent you, and she will give you a fair rate. Daniel agreed, though Eleanor could see he was uncomfortable accepting so much help. But the Chens had a way of making assistance feel like friendship rather than charity, and eventually Daniel relaxed. That evening, after Daniel had gone to find the boarding house and get settled, Eleanor sat with Sarah Chen in the kitchen, helping to prepare vegetables for dinner despite her ankle. "You and Mr. Ellis are not married," Sarah said, and it was a statement rather than a question. "No. We are barely even friends, really. He was just helping me." "Men do not give up their own journeys for just helping," Sarah said, echoing Margaret Porter's sentiments. "That young man has feelings for you, whether he has admitted them or not." "Everyone keeps saying that," Eleanor said, "but what am I supposed to do about it? I have nothing. I am living on charity. How can I even think about romance when I cannot support myself?" Sarah set down her knife and looked at Eleanor seriously. "I came to California 10 years ago as a mail-order bride for a man I had never met. When I arrived, he took one look at me and decided I was not pretty enough. I was stranded in San Francisco with no money and no way home. I took work as a seamstress, barely making enough to eat. Then I met Y. Chen at the boarding house where I was living. He was a doctor, but most Americans would not go to him because he was Chinese. We became friends first, talking in the evenings about medicine and philosophy and our different cultures. Then, friends became something more. When we married, both our communities were scandalized, but we did not care. We made our own life together." "That is a wonderful story," Eleanor said softly, "but it does not solve my immediate problems. My point is that love does not wait for perfect circumstances. And women are stronger than we are taught to believe. You are educated. You are resourceful. You will find your way with or without Mr. Ellis. But do not close your heart to him just because you think you are not in a position to have feelings." Eleanor absorbed this wisdom in silence, her hands busy with the vegetables. Sarah Chen was right, of course. Eleanor had been so focused on what she lacked that she had not thought about what she could build. She was alive, healthy aside from her ankle, and she had skills that were valuable. Maybe San Pedro was not the end of her journey but a new beginning. Daniel came to visit the next day, his hair still damp from washing and wearing a clean shirt. Sarah Chen, with the subtlety of a matchmaker in a Jane Austen novel, found urgent business elsewhere after letting him in, leaving Eleanor and Daniel alone in the parlor. "How are you feeling?" Daniel asked, settling into a chair across from her. "Much better with a real bed and good food. Doctor Chen says the ankle is healing well." Eleanor studied his face, looking for clues to his state of mind. "Have you found work?" "I talked to a man named Captain Rodriguez this morning. He runs a freight business between here and Los Angeles. He needs someone to help with his horses and guard the shipments. The pay is decent, and he says if I work out, it could be steady employment." "That is wonderful," Eleanor said, genuinely happy for him. "Though I confess I am surprised you are planning to stay in San Pedro. I thought you preferred moving around." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I have been thinking about what I said before, about wanting a place of my own. San Pedro seems like as good a place as any to put down roots. There is work here, good people. And it is beautiful country." "Those are all excellent reasons," Eleanor said carefully. "And there is one more reason," Daniel said, leaning forward slightly. "I want to be here to see you healed and on your feet again. I want to know that you are safe and settled. I cannot explain it exactly, but leaving you now would feel like leaving a job half-finished." Eleanor's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I am not a job, Daniel." "No," he agreed. "You are not. You are something altogether different, and I am not sure I have the words for it yet. But I know I am not ready to say goodbye." The air between them felt charged with possibility. Eleanor wanted to say something profound, something that would match the moment, but all that came out was, "I am not ready either." Daniel's smile was like sunrise. Then I guess we are both staying in San Pedro for a while. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Daniel worked for Captain Rodriguez, leaving early in the morning and returning in the late afternoon. He would stop by the Chen house most evenings, sometimes staying for dinner if Sarah insisted, which she usually did. Eleanor helped Sarah with household tasks that she could do while sitting, and in return, Sarah taught her about herbs and medicine and the practical arts of running a home in California. Eleanor also began teaching Sarah Chinese characters, using books from Dr. Chen's collection, and found that she enjoyed the challenge of learning alongside her student. As Eleanor's ankle healed, she began to venture out more. Sarah took her on walks through San Pedro, introducing her to other families in the town. There was a strong community of Chinese immigrants who worked in fishing and trade, as well as Mexican families who had been in California for generations, and a growing population of Americans drawn by the harbor's commercial prospects. It was more diverse than anywhere Eleanor had ever lived, and she found she liked it. She also began to see Daniel differently as the initial crisis of her injury faded. She watched how he interacted with others in town, always respectful regardless of their background. She heard stories from Captain Rodriguez about Daniel's integrity, how he had refused a bribe from smugglers trying to use the freight business as a cover. She saw his gentleness when he helped an elderly Chinese fisherman whose cart had lost a wheel, spending his own time fixing it and refusing payment. And she felt the growing warmth between them, the way conversations stretched longer, the way their hands would brush accidentally and neither would pull away. Daniel brought her small gifts, a pretty shell from the beach, a book he thought she might enjoy, a hair ribbon from the general store. They were simple things, but each one felt like a declaration. 2 months after their arrival in San Pedro, Eleanor's ankle was pronounced fully healed. She could walk without pain, and even managed a short hike up to the bluffs overlooking the ocean. Daniel went with her, and they stood together watching the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "I have been thinking," Daniel said, his eyes on the horizon. "Captain Rodriguez has offered me a partnership. He wants to expand the business, maybe get a couple more wagons and some better horses. He would put up most of the capital, but he wants someone he trusts to help run things. Says I have a good head for the business." "Daniel, that is incredible," Eleanor said. "You would be a business owner." "Part owner," he corrected. "But yes, it is the kind of opportunity I never expected to have, the kind that could set a man up for a real future." He turned to face her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. The kind of future where a man could support a wife. Eleanor's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Are you asking me something?" "I am trying to work up the courage to," Daniel admitted. "I know we have not known each other long. I know the circumstances of how we met were hardly romantic. But Eleanor, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Every day I wake up looking forward to seeing you. Every evening I go to bed thinking about our conversations. I love your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you laugh and the way you think about things. I love you, and I am fairly certain I have loved you since the moment I found you sitting in the dirt with that broken ankle, refusing to cry." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid I was imagining things, or that it was too soon, or that you would think I was just grateful." "Are you just grateful?" Daniel asked softly. "No. Gratitude is what I feel for the Chens and the Porters. What I feel for you is something entirely different. Something that makes my chest feel too tight and too full all at the same time. something that makes me want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like." Daniel closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. "Eleanor Dalton, will you marry me?" "I do not have a ring yet, and I know I should have planned this better, but I cannot wait another moment to ask." "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, with the Pacific wind whipping around them and the cry of gulls overhead. It was everything a first kiss should be and more, full of promise and passion and the joy of new love. They were married 3 weeks later in the small Catholic church that served San Pedro's diverse community. Father Ramirez performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, a nod to the town's heritage. Sarah Chen stood up as Eleanor's witness, and Captain Rodriguez served as Daniel's. Dr. Chen gave Eleanor away, and there was not a dry eye in the church when he spoke about how sometimes broken things, when properly mended, became stronger than before. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had helped her make, and she carried wildflowers that Daniel had picked that morning from the hills above town. The wedding was small, but it felt perfect. Margaret and James Porter even made the journey down from their homestead, and Margaret cried through the entire ceremony. Daniel had found them a small house to rent on the edge of town, close enough to be part of the community, but with enough land for a vegetable garden and a few chickens. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. On their wedding night, as they lay together in their own bed in their own home, Eleanor marveled at how completely her life had changed. "You ever regret it?" she asked Daniel in the darkness. "Giving up your plans for me?" "Those were not really plans," Daniel said, pulling her closer. "That was just drifting. This is living, and no, I do not regret a single moment." The freight business prospered. Daniel proved to have a natural talent for logistics and negotiations, and Captain Rodriguez's faith in him was rewarded with increased profits. Within a year, they had expanded to 4 wagons and employed 6 men. Daniel and Eleanor were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and that felt like a luxury after the uncertainty of those first days. Eleanor found her own purpose as well. She began teaching children in their home, starting with just 2 students but quickly growing to a dozen. The families paid what they could, sometimes in cash but often in goods or services. Eleanor did not mind. She loved teaching, loved seeing young minds open up to new ideas. She taught in English, but also encouraged her students to maintain their Spanish and Chinese, believing that their multilingual abilities would serve them well in California's evolving society. She and Sarah Chen remained close friends, sharing meals and confidences. Through Sarah, Eleanor learned more about Chinese medicine and philosophy. Through Eleanor, Sarah improved her reading and writing in both English and Chinese. They were an unlikely pair, but their friendship was deep and genuine. 2 years into their marriage, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Daniel was over the moon, immediately becoming protective and insistent that she rest more. Eleanor, who felt perfectly fine, found his hovering both annoying and endearing. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one evening when he tried to forbid her from moving a chair. "I know, but I want to take care of you," Daniel said. "Is that so wrong?" Eleanor softened, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "No, it is not wrong. But you have to trust me to know my own body. I will rest when I need to rest. I promise." Their son was born in the spring of 1870, a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas Porter Ellis, honoring both Thomas Chen and James Porter, 2 men who had shown them kindness when they needed it most. Motherhood transformed Eleanor in ways she had not expected. The fierce love she felt for her son was almost frightening in its intensity. She understood now why Daniel had stayed behind on that wagon trail, why he had given up everything to help a stranger. Love demanded that kind of sacrifice. Love made it not a sacrifice at all, but a privilege. Daniel was a devoted father, coming home from work each day eager to hold his son, to tell him stories even though Thomas was far too young to understand. Eleanor would watch them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When Thomas was 6 months old, they decided to visit the Porters at their homestead. It was a 2-day journey now that they had their own wagon, and they made a family adventure of it. Margaret cried when she saw them, gathering them all into fierce hugs. "Look at you," she said to Eleanor. "A wife and mother now, and so happy." "Thanks to you and your husband," Eleanor said. "If you had not taken us in that night, given us a place to rest and good advice, I do not know if we would have made it." "Nonsense," Margaret said briskly, though she looked pleased. "You two were meant to be together. Anyone could see that. We just provided a bed and a meal." They stayed 3 days with the Porters, and James taught Daniel more about homesteading and working the land. Daniel was increasingly interested in the possibility of buying property, perhaps expanding beyond just the freight business. He talked about it on the journey back to San Pedro, his eyes bright with plans and possibilities. "What do you think?" he asked Eleanor. "Would you want to try ranching?" "I think I want whatever makes you happy," Eleanor said honestly. "And I think you have been itching to work with animals and land since I met you. The freight business is good, but it is not your passion." "Neither is ranching, necessarily," Daniel said thoughtfully. "But building something, creating something lasting, that calls to me. I like the idea of our children growing up with land they can call their own." "Children?" Eleanor asked with a smile. "You are already planning more." "I am planning everything," Daniel said, grinning. "I figure we should have at least 3 or 4, maybe more. Fill that house up with noise and laughter." And they did, over the years that followed. A daughter came 2 years after Thomas, and they named her Sarah Margaret Ellis, honoring the 2 women who had befriended Eleanor in her time of need. Then another son, James Daniel Ellis, 2 years after that. Their small rented house became too small, and with the money Daniel had saved from the freight business, they purchased land about 5 miles outside San Pedro, near the bluffs where Daniel had proposed. The house they built was not grand, but it was solid and comfortable, with room for their growing family. They started with 12 horses and slowly built up a herd. Daniel discovered he had a gift for training horses, and word spread. People came from as far as Los Angeles to buy horses trained by Daniel Ellis, known for their reliability and gentle temperament. Eleanor continued teaching, though now she held classes in a small schoolhouse that the community had built. She taught children of all backgrounds, insisting that education was a right, not a privilege. Some of the wealthier families in San Pedro objected to their children learning alongside Chinese and Mexican students, but Eleanor held firm. If they did not like her methods, they were welcome to hire a different teacher. Most decided her teaching was too valuable to lose, even if they grumbled about her progressive ideas. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books almost as much as his mother. Sarah was wild and free-spirited, always coming home with scraped knees and stories of adventure. James was quiet and gentle, with a natural way with animals that made his father proud. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Eleanor and Daniel would sit on their porch watching the sun set over the Pacific. These were Eleanor's favorite moments, the quiet peace after the chaos of the day, the solid warmth of Daniel beside her. "You ever think about that wagon train?" Daniel asked one evening. They were older now, in their 30s, with the first threads of silver appearing in their hair. "Wonder what happened to all those people." "Sometimes," Eleanor admitted. "I hope they made it to wherever they were going, but I am grateful they left me behind. If they had not, I never would have found this life." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Daniel said. "Some things are meant to be." "You have become a romantic in your old age," Eleanor teased. "I have always been a romantic. I just needed the right person to be romantic with." In 1875, Captain Rodriguez retired and sold Daniel his half of the freight business. Daniel combined it with the horse ranch, creating an operation that bred and trained horses specifically for freight work. It was a smart move, and the business continued to thrive. They were able to hire help, both for the ranch and in the house, giving Eleanor more time to focus on teaching and Daniel more time to spend with his children. They added one more child to their family, another daughter born when Eleanor was 36. They named her Margaret Rose Ellis, and she was, as Margaret Porter declared when she came to visit and meet her namesake, the prettiest baby she had ever seen. The Porter visits became an annual tradition. James and Margaret would come to San Pedro, and the Ellis family would go to the homestead. The children loved the Porters, calling them Grandma and Grandpa, since Eleanor had no family of her own and Daniel's sister remained distant in Texas. Dr. Chen and Sarah also remained close friends, even as their own children grew and started families. The connections forged in those early days in San Pedro proved lasting and deep. It was not just Eleanor and Daniel who had built a life together, but a whole community that looked after each other. When Thomas was 15, he announced that he wanted to go to college in San Francisco to study law. Eleanor was thrilled and terrified in equal measure. Daniel supported his son's ambitions without hesitation, even though it meant Thomas would be far from home. "We raised him to think for himself and follow his dreams," Daniel said when Eleanor worried aloud about Thomas leaving. "We cannot hold him back just because we will miss him." Sarah, their eldest daughter, had no interest in leaving. She wanted to stay on the ranch to work with the horses. Some of the neighbors thought it scandalous for a young woman to do such work, but Daniel taught her everything he knew, and she proved to have an even better instinct for horses than he did. James wanted to be a veterinarian and left to study in Los Angeles when he was 17. Little Margaret Rose was still young, but she showed signs of being a teacher like her mother, always organizing the younger children in the area into classes and making them practice their letters. Eleanor was in her early 40s when she realized that the life she had built was far richer than the one she had been traveling toward when that wagon train abandoned her. She was not teaching at a prestigious academy in San Francisco. She was teaching ranch children and fishermen's sons and daughters of immigrants in a small town most people had never heard of. But she had made a real difference in real lives. She had built something that mattered, and she had Daniel. After more than 15 years of marriage, he still made her heart flutter when he walked through the door. They still talked for hours, still laughed together, still reached for each other in the darkness. Their love had not diminished with time and familiarity. It had deepened, become richer, more complex. One evening when they were alone on the porch watching another sunset, Daniel took her hand. "You remember what you asked me on our wedding night, if I regretted giving up my plans?" "I remember," Eleanor said. "I have a better answer now. I did not give up plans. I traded aimless wandering for purpose. I traded loneliness for love. I traded a life that would have been forgotten for one that matters. You and our children, this ranch, our friends, this community we are part of, this is everything I never knew I wanted. This is everything I never let myself hope for. And it all started because I could not ride away and leave you sitting in the dirt with a broken ankle." Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks. "You gave me more than your help that day. You gave me hope. You showed me that people can be good, that love can be real, that second chances exist. Everything I have, everything I am now started with you choosing to stay." "We chose each other," Daniel said, "and I would choose you again every day for the rest of my life." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sounds of their ranch drifted up from below, horses nickering, chickens settling for the night, the distant laughter of their youngest daughter playing with the ranch dog. This was their kingdom, small and imperfect but wholly theirs. The years continued their steady march. Thomas graduated from college and became a lawyer in San Francisco, but he came home regularly, and eventually he brought a young woman named Catherine to meet his parents. They married in the same church where Daniel and Eleanor had wed, and Eleanor saw in Catherine's eyes the same joy she had felt on her own wedding day. Sarah never married, declaring that she loved the ranch too much to leave it. She took over much of the day-to-day operations as Daniel grew older and proved herself a better horse breeder than anyone in 3 counties. Ranchers came from all over California to buy Sarah Ellis's horses. James became a successful veterinarian and returned to San Pedro to practice, much to his parents' joy. He married a schoolteacher named Anne, one of Eleanor's former students, and they settled close to the ranch. Margaret Rose did indeed become a teacher, taking over her mother's school when Eleanor finally retired at the age of 55. By then, Eleanor had taught 3 generations of children in San Pedro, and her influence was visible throughout the town. Daniel retired from active work on the ranch around the same time, though he still spent every day with the horses, unable to fully step away from what he loved. His hair had gone white, and his face was deeply lined from years in the sun, but his eyes were still that startling blue, and they still looked at Eleanor with the same love they had held 30 years earlier. They were grandparents now, with Thomas's children visiting from San Francisco and James's children growing up practically next door. The house that had once held their own children's laughter now rang with the sounds of grandchildren, and Eleanor thought there was no sweeter music. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. Half of San Pedro seemed to attend, a testament to the lives they had built and the connections they had forged. Dr. Chen and Sarah were there, both elderly now but still sharp and vital. Margaret and James Porter had both passed away, but their memory was honored. Captain Rodriguez, retired and living with his daughter, made the trip to celebrate the couple who had been like family to him. Thomas stood to give a toast, his lawyer's training evident in his smooth delivery. "My parents' story began with abandonment and injury, with fear and uncertainty. But because my father chose compassion over convenience, and because my mother chose hope over despair, that story became one of love and family and community. They taught us that character is revealed in crisis, that real strength is gentleness, that the greatest adventure is building a life with someone you love." To Daniel and Eleanor Ellis, the finest parents anyone could ask for. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Eleanor looked at Daniel through tears, and he squeezed her hand, his own eyes damp. "We did all right, did we not?" he said softly. "We did better than all right," Eleanor replied. "We built something beautiful." In their later years, they spent more and more time on the porch, watching the world go by. Daniel would tell stories to their grandchildren, tales of the old days when California was wilder, when he had been a wandering cowboy with no roots. The children loved these stories. though they could hardly imagine their grandfather as anything other than the kind, steady presence he had always been in their lives. Eleanor would watch and listen, adding her own details, correcting Daniel when he embellished too much. She would remember that girl who had been left behind by a wagon train, terrified and injured and alone. That girl had been certain her life was over. She could never have imagined this future, this abundance of love and family and purpose. Daniel's health began to fail when he was in his late 60s, his heart growing weak. The doctor, James Chen now, Dr. Y. Chen's son who had taken over the practice, said there was nothing to be done but make him comfortable. Daniel faced his decline with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his life. "I am not afraid," he told Eleanor one evening. They were in their bed, the windows open to let in the sea breeze. "I have had a good life, the best life. I have loved and been loved. I have seen my children grow into good people. I have made my mark, small as it might be. I am ready." "I am not ready," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I do not know how to be in this world without you." "You will manage," Daniel said, touching her face gently. "You are the strongest person I know, and you will not be alone. Our children will look after you, and the community we built will hold you up. But Eleanor, when your time comes, whenever that is, I will be waiting for you. I promise." Daniel Ellis died on a clear morning in early spring, with Eleanor holding his hand and his children gathered around his bed. He slipped away peacefully, and Eleanor felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. The grief was immense, oceanic, threatening to drown her. But Daniel had been right. She was not alone. Her children rallied around her, and the community that she and Daniel had been part of for so long supported her through her mourning. Letters came from people they had helped over the years, sharing stories of Daniel's kindness, his integrity, his generosity. Eleanor learned things about her husband she had never known, small acts of charity he had never mentioned, people he had quietly helped when they were struggling. She stayed on the ranch, which Sarah ran with capable hands. She continued to spend time with her grandchildren, to offer advice to Margaret Rose about teaching, to welcome James's patients when they came to the house looking for her son. She lived, even though part of her had died with Daniel. 5 years after Daniel's death, on a warm evening in June, Eleanor sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was 72 years old, and her body ached with the accumulated years, but her mind was still clear. She thought about the wagon train that had abandoned her. So long ago it seemed like another lifetime. She thought about Daniel riding back to find her, his young face serious and determined. She thought about the choices they had made, the life they had built together. She had been a widow now for 5 years, but she did not feel like only half a person. She felt whole, carried forward by the love that she and Daniel had created, by the family they had raised, by the community they had been part of. Their love had not ended with his death. It lived on in their children, their grandchildren, the school Margaret Rose ran, the ranch Sarah managed, the veterinary practice James maintained. It lived on in the horses that bore the Ellis brand, known throughout California for their quality. It lived on in the stories people told about the cowboy and the schoolteacher who had built something lasting. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the sea breeze on her face, and she could almost feel Daniel beside her. Almost hear his voice telling her another story, almost feel his hand in hers. She had been abandoned once, left behind to die. Instead, she had found love. She had found purpose. She had found home. And when her own time came, peacefully in her sleep 2 years later, surrounded by family, she went gladly, knowing that somewhere Daniel was indeed waiting for her, just as he had promised. Their story, which had begun in dust and pain and fear, had become something beautiful, something lasting. something that would be remembered and retold for generations to come. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Sarah's line since she had never married and had adopted children to carry on the work. The school continued under Margaret Rose's direction and then her daughters after her. Thomas's children became lawyers and judges, carrying forward their grandfather's integrity. James's children became doctors and teachers and ranchers, spreading throughout California, but always maintaining ties to San Pedro. And in the town cemetery, under an oak tree with a view of the Pacific, 2 headstones stood side by side. Daniel Ellis, 1842–1909, beloved husband, father, and friend. Eleanor Dalton Ellis, 1845–1916, beloved wife, mother, and teacher. Simple inscriptions for lives that had been anything but simple. But those who knew their story, who had heard it passed down through the generations, understood that those stones marked more than just graves. They marked the foundation of something enduring. A love that had started with one man's choice to stay, one woman's choice to hope, and had grown into a legacy that touched hundreds of lives. In the end, Eleanor Dalton had not made it to San Francisco to teach at a prestigious academy. She had made it somewhere better. She had made it home, to a place she had built with her own hands and heart, alongside the man who had loved her enough to give up everything for her, and who had gained everything in return. Their story became part of San Pedro's history, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy. But the heart of it remained true. That love can be found in the most unexpected places, that courage sometimes looks like staying when everyone else leaves, and that the best lives are built not on grand plans but on small, daily choices to show up, to care, to commit. And on warm June evenings, when the sun sets over the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson, it is easy to imagine 2 figures sitting on a porch somewhere, hand in hand, watching the day end and knowing that they had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it.